Hello, I'm going to start the second lecture of the first week. Today's lecture will be warm-up before the start of the main lecture that will begin next week. In today's lecture, I'd like to talk about the overall story of residence. It's estimated that humans first appeared on Earth more than a million years ago. People at the time would have looked somewhat different from us today. However, it would not be too much to say that the cave life of the Paleolithic era, which wanted to create a residence against nature, was the first residence of mankind. However, people of this period survived by hunting and gathering, so they were far from settled life. Since the settlement was not guaranteed like this, the residence was not considered until later generations. So housing as an artificial structure to leave to the next generation only emerged after the Neolithic period when agriculture was based. Humans only began to settle in the Neolithic period, which is believed to have begun around 10,000 to 8,000 before current era. It seems that humans began to live in homes and villages from this time. As agriculture became the basis of industry and settled in one place, humans went through many changes. Humans learned the laws of nature by looking at the cyclical seasons, and as the production of grain increased, it became possible to store it. As surplus goods became possible, there were people who could live without labor. Some of them became experts in other fields than agriculture. And there was also a differentiation of occupations. The larger the economy, the more people with various technologies, the more houses, and the larger the village. Among the many phenomena that emerged with the Neolithic age, the most characteristic is the emergence of village. As the Neolithic civilization took hold, community life became common, with an average of about 1,000 people living together. The Jericho of the province of Anatolia and the province of Palestine, believed to be around 8,000 BC, is a prime example. The Neolithic village was not only a shelter from predators, but also a place where humans deliberately touched part of nature. This included land cultivated for production, human and livestock dwellings, food storage and cultivation tools, breeding, defense, decorations, and sacrifice. It was a long time after the settlement began that there was a settlement that we could call a city. The ancient cities occurred in Mesopotamia in the Tigris and Euphrates River around 3500 BC, in the Yellow River Basin around 1500 BC, and in the Indus River Basin around 2500 BC. The city included villages, castles, sanctuaries, and markets. In other words, the city defended its inhabitants from outside intrusion, healed their weary lives and weary souls, and provided a place of exchange for a richer life. The city was a good invention in many ways for people at the time. So many people gathered in the city. As a result of the gathering of people, various social groups were created and production activities were specialized and divided. The functions of sleeping, drinking, eating, talking, and educating became larger and more specialized, and each was divided into inns, baths, marketplace, temples, and schools. As the functions of the city are differentiated, it has become possible for society to evolve or plan for evolution. Not only did the city become larger than the village in its size, but the diversity of life contained in it also became incomparably more complex. In order for the city to grow at this time, more labor was needed. Unlike modern society, where the value of production was on land or capital, the value of production at this time was on labor. The ancient society was a society in which labor was a value, so it was very important to have a large population at this time. Cities needed a lot of labor to develop or evolve, and collective housing became necessary for them to live in. In addition, large families were a common society at this time. Their lives were shared by many things together, and the emergence of collective housing was essential for families, workers, or more people to work and lead lives more efficiently in this communal life. These early collective houses were observed in Mohenjo-daro in the Indus River Basin, Uru in Mesopotamia, and Kahun in Egypt. Collective housing, which appears in all of these ancient sites, is believed to be primarily for workers. It shows that there was a significant degree of high-density housing in ancient society to show the differentiation of residential areas between the ruling and the controlled. Uru, for example, had an estimated population of 35,000 people on an area of 89 hectares. So the population density per hectare here was about 395. To help you understand, compared to the current Seoul, the population density in Seoul is 188 people per hectare as of 2012 too. You can see the Uru's population density was about 2.5 times that of Seoul today. In urban space, the act of living is an act of relationship with the surrounding living space. In other words, living in the city means that many people are forced to live together. So we need to secure a relationship with urban space. So people in cities have no choice but to have space and connection between people and people. After all, urban housing means living in urban space by forming relationship with the surroundings and living in communal life. This communal life is maximized, and the more collective architectural style of urban housing is collective housing. Therefore, multifamily housing has the meaning of being a place that dramatically visualizes their relationship in human life. These residential houses started from ancient cities as workers' residence and have undergone several changes since then. As mentioned earlier, it is believed that collective housing has existed since the beginning of human history, but the origin of multifamily housing known on record is during the Roman Empire. Rome's population at this time was close to 1 million. Not everyone could live in the high-end houses with pavilion called domus, which the Romans preferred at the time. Most common people lived mainly in insula, a multi-story apartment building. This multi-story residential building accommodated 90% of the city's population and was mostly built of bricks. The first floor was mainly used as a store, and the upper floor was an apartment which was supposed to go up through each stairway. This apartment was quite spacious, and sometimes it had 12 rooms across 2 floors. These insulas were unknown to us because some of them remained in Ostia, which was the outer port of Rome. It was a city that played the same role as Incheon, the outer port of Seoul. These apartments date back to 2nd century AD under the reign of Emperor Traianus, Hadrianus, and Antonius Pius, and most of the apartment houses in Rome were built around AD 64, after the Great Fire of the Nero Emperor. Later, Rome adopted a system of urban tissue, with this insula being the majority, with private residence domus in place. After the fall of Great Rome Empire, as we enter into the Middle Age, cities are shrinking. In terms of urban prosperity, the term Dark Age would be right. The various forms of urban infrastructure and the splendid culture that Rome had built were almost wiped out. Cities with diminished power and wealth compared to the Roman era were eager to depend. The general defense method was to build a castle on the hillside, and even that was forced to build a small castle due to limitations of labor, because the castle was so small. Not all residents could live in it. Naturally, it was divided into bourgeoisie who could live in the castle and those who could not. The only classes that could live in the castle were workmen and merchants, in addition to the lords and knights. At this time, there were no large cities, but only medium and small cities existed. Milan and Paris, the largest cities among them, had about 200,000 people. Venice had about 150,000 people, and Siena had about 50,000 people. Of course, this population was relatively small compared to the population of contemporary Byzantine, Islamic, or Eastern cities. But the population density within the castle is estimated to be very high. Under these circumstances, most of the housing in the castle was apartment house to accommodate many people. In the late Middle Age, in the early Renaissance, the introduction of gunpowder weakened the defensive function of the castle, but the castle still existed. With the development of commerce, such as Eastern trade, the population grew and city began to become overcrowded. To solve this urban housing problem, the large scale of 3.8 to 6 meter wide, thin and long-shaped rental row houses, known as continuous houses, were built. These buildings were built in large quantities by the square and were leased to workmen. These houses consist of 3 to 4 floors, the lower floor of which consisted of commercial facilities, mostly blocks with a small garden in the center. On the other hand, after the Renaissance, many large-scale residential houses were built, including Covent Garden, Leicester Square, and James Square. As another type of houses, townhouses have become a representative type of house. Block house with gardens in the center now make up the landscape of old European cities. Contrary to this trend in Western and Western Asia, collective housing has not been greatly developed in the region centered on East Asia. The reason is presumed to be that the deep-rooted clan society is the foundation of society and the architectural structure. If you look at the case of collective housing, the Tulou during the Qing dynasty, which was found in Nanjing County, an inland area of Fujian province in China, is a representative example. But this Tulou to for a large clan, and it's a small town that's integrated into a single building, which is different from the houses that appeared in the West. Cities that became increasingly dense in the 16th to 18th centuries began to change significantly after the 19th century due to the Industrial Revolution and the development of industrial capitalism. The Industrial Revolution enabled the use of highly mobile, high efficiency energy source for mankind, which had been dependent on natural forces and human and animal labor. Therefore, the choice of location to build a city has increased, and the development of transportation using machine has led to expansion of the city. At the same time, due to collapse of rural society, the city became more overcrowded as many self-employed and tenant farmers flowed into the city as workers. And as the fortress became meaningless due to development of transportation such as railways, the boundaries of the city were broken down and the suburban area began to develop. Unfortunately, however, the expansion of the city did not bring about the expansion of the housing at the same time. In particular, the living condition of the workers were very poor during this period. The deterioration of the residential environment is also seen in the average life expectancy of workers at the time. The average age of death for aristocrats and upper classes in England and Wales was 88, while the average age of workers in Lambeth was 29. Modern public housing was mainly in the form of the rental housing, most of which were rental housing for workers in poor cities. At the time, the average number of residents per house in the UK was 76 people, and in Berlin, 52.6 people lived in one house. In addition, the building coverage ratio in this area exceeded 80%. At the same time, New York's 10th and 11th districts had the worst population density of about 1,730 people per hectare. It is more than 11 times the population density of Seoul. Many urban architectural movements and theories emerged to solve this 19th century city situation. This model of ideal city included Ebenezer Howard's Garden City, Tony Garnier's Industrial City, Arturo Soria Imata's Linear City, Theodore Pritz's Future City, Le Corbusier's Plan Voisin, and the Radiant City, Stein and Henri Wright's Redmond Layout, and Frank Lloyd Wright's Broadacre City. In the early 20th century, urban housing began to become rapidly suburbanized due to various regulations in the city center and the development of transportation. As a result, the residential environment has improved to some extent. This movement and theory led to the construction of many new towns and communal housing complexes in the suburbs of the city. Letchworth, known as the first Garden City by Unwin and Parker, is a case in point. In addition, Hampstead, New Earwick, Ealing, Letchworth, Leicester, Cardiff, and Stoke-on-Trent were built in the UK. The period from the late 1940s to the 1960s, which came with the end of World War II, can be characterized by mass production and consumption and urban expansion. The mass production and mass consumption system represented by Fordism, the popularization of automobile, and modified capitalism based on Keynesian economic, are known to have promoted urban suburbanization and large-scale apartment building. During this period, many new towns and large-scale apartment complexes were built in Europe, such as England, Germany, and France. It's a combination of governance, strong support, and modern urban architecture. This trend peaked in the 1960s. Let's look at the situation in the UK as a case in point. In the United Kingdom, a total of 32 new towns were built by 1972, including the new town Stevenage and the low-density new town Milton Keynes, after the New Town Act was approved by the King in 1946. Meanwhile, the demolition of the Pretty Eagle, built in St. Louis in the United States during this period, was an important opportunity, because through this incident, people started to think that there was a problem with the tendency to build large-scale apartment house. The apartment house was recognized as a good building in the early days of construction and was even awarded the American Architects Association Award. However, it was demolished on July 15, 1972, 18 years after its completion. The occupancy rate never exceeded 60% until the building was completed and demolished, and by 1970, 27 out of 33 buildings were reduced to empty houses. Eventually, it was demolished in 1972 with a huge loss of $300 million. The cause of this building's failure is described as follows. First, residents were not considered in the initial design phase. Secondly, there was no room for social interaction. Third, isolated from the surrounding area. As you have learned in architectural theory, this apartment house is also referred to as an event that represents the failure of modern urban architecture. In particular, many people argue that modern architects, including Le Corbusier, are wrong. But we need to think more about whether that's the right way to look at it. In the late 20th century, environmental degradation and the climate change crisis became major global issue. About 8,000 people died of bronchitis and pneumonia in the murder smoke that covered downtown London from December 8th to 9th, 1952. And the temperature of the earth is steadily rising, and accordingly various natural disasters such as heat wave, cold wave, drought, and heavy rain are occurring. Also, the number of species that go extinct a year was in the 1900s. Out of the total 30 million species, but increased to 1,000 in 1975. Recently, 25,000 to 50,000 species are extinct every year. In response to this phenomenon, the 1992 Rio United Nations Conference on Environmental Development adopted the goal of environmentally sound and sustainable development, short ESSD. Sustainable development is defined as development that meets current need without compromising the ability to meet the needs of future generations. Accordingly, the main issue of recent urban and residential district plans is the achievement of the sustainability. In this regard, efforts are underway to use natural energy sources such as solar, wind, and geothermal power, or to reduce energy consumption. In addition, various efforts are underway to minimize damage to the ecosystem, plan ecological tunnels, and green projects using planting, biotope planning, and excellent recycling in the construction of apartment houses. Sustainability consists of three pillars: environment, economy, and society. In addition to environmental sustainability, socio-economic sustainability is also being emphasized. To this end, user participating design, affordable housing, social mix, and crime prevent through environmental design are important. These sustainable apartment complexes include Germany's Kielhase Eco Settlement and Bourbon Residential Complex. In the UK, a Bedjet residential complex aimed to zero energy consumption was built in the late 1990s. In the 21st century, carbon-neutral cities such as Royal Seaport and Nordhavn are being built. We will study this example of sustainable urban development and residential district through case study and presentation later. We have looked at the history of the act of residence that began with the settlement of mankind. The act expanded to the huge city through a small village. In the process, communal living and social class occurred. The communal life led to one of the subjects of this social class, the collective housing. Please remember the insula, which is known as the first multifamily house, because the modifier first is always one of the main characters of the exam. Now, these houses were completed as a block house through the Middle Age and into modern times. It would be building form that represent a European city. The block-type house will be changed to its current shape through row house and townhouse. The block-type house surrounding the city block has a garden in the middle, is about 5 to 6 stories high, and the first floor is a store, and above it is a house. These block-type houses are not familiar to us, but this is a good residential model. This is because the context of the residential complex and the city is well connected. We will learn about this in the 5th week. After the Industrial Revolution, the hygiene of the city deteriorates significantly. Various ideas emerged to solve these problems. Modernists like Le Corbusier and Frank Lloyd Wright, who we know well, present various ideal city ideas. The most representative idea is Ebenezer Howard's Garden City theory, known as the father of urban planning. He presented an urban model that combined the advantages of urban and rural areas. We are going to learn about these specific histories and theories from next week to the 4th week. Later, one of the most important issues of the urban planning and architectural planning in the 20th century became environmental issue. Global warming, climate change, etc. have become the biggest task that mankind has to solve. Of course, this issue is one of the most important issues in the planning and design of the dwelling in which we live. So recently planned dwellings and cities are considering this. This recent example of residential and urban development considering environmental sustainability will be addressed in your presentation. Please remember the concept of ESSD. There are other socio-economic sustainability issues. This is because various people live in the society we live in, It is an issue related to equality. We will learn about this in the 6th and 7th weeks. Okay, lastly, I will summarize in Korean and end today's class. Thank you for your listening.